not as though I had already attained, either were already perfect, but I follow after that I may apprehend that for which also I am apprehended of Christ Jesus. Brethren, I count not myself to have apprehended, but this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind, and reaching forth unto those things which are before, I press forward the mark of the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. That is Philippians 3:12 through 14. Welcome back to another episode of Thinking Well. I'm Kyle.
And I'm Nick.
Hey, Nick, how are you?
I'm good, Kyle. How are you doing?
Good. Another episode live from Timberline.
Yep. Another hot day at Timberline.
Yeah. Live to you, but recorded a couple weeks ago.
Yep.
But yeah, it's a hot one. Super humid. Walked not even probably half a mile from our dorm down here. And pretty terrible.
But it's been a great week so far. Speaker's been great, and there's been some good reception to our teens and to our adults even. Some tear-filled devotions, but God's been super good.
Yeah, very, very stirring conversations. We'll have him on one of the podcasts coming up.
Mm-hmm.
We're actually going to interview him as of today. It'll be tomorrow that we're going to record with him. But one of the great things about this camp, and we heard a little bit about it from our episode with Craig and Quentin, is the relationships that we have between churches, other believers, other pastors. This community that we've cultivated, and we all get to show up here and spend time together in fellowship. With that being said, our guest today is the lead pastor of Rodgers Baptist Church in Garland, Texas, Brother Travis Gilbert. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, buddy. It's good to be with you.
Yeah, thanks for being here, man.
Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. Well, we wanted to make this happen for a while.
Sure, we have. We've been working towards this.
Yes, finally made it happen. But, we were talking before about, exactly kind of how to approach the episode. And it's almost a shame that some of the stuff we talked about before recording, we didn't capture.
Yeah.
Some good stuff.
I know.
But what I'd like to do, Brother Travis, I don't know if a lot of our listeners know your story, know your background. So I'd love for you to, if you will, maybe tell us a little bit of your life story and your testimony.
Okay.
And we'll kind of go from there.
Awesome. Well, my salvation testimony begins with my mom and dad. So I say a lot of times that the fall of 1980 is when my mom got right and my dad got saved. And before that time, so I was born in 73, and before October of 1980, I lived in a very moral household. My dad loved my mom. He was a good man, a good provider, a hard worker, a very moral man. And I don't have any kind of negative memories of bad things happening or being said, violent actions. But it was a moral home without Jesus in it. And then my mom and dad's best friends, the Holidays, who would come over to the house all the time, or we'd be over at their house all the time. Jerry Holiday, his brother Dale, had gotten saved, and he had witnessed to his brother and sister-in-law, and they had gotten saved, and then they witnessed to their best friends, my mom and dad. And I'll never forget that night. The holidays were over. That was not unusual. But what was odd was my mom was sitting on the edge of her bed. Margie Holiday was sitting next to her. They had a book open, and I didn't know what the book was. And Mom was crying, and I was upset. I was 7, almost 8, and I went in there. I said, "Mom, what's the matter? Why are you upset?" And she says, "I'm not upset, honey." And I said, "You're crying?" And she said, "It's a good crying." She said, "Go see your dad." And so I went to Dad, and he's pacing the living room floor, and Jerry's talking with him. And Dad had a concerned look on his face. He didn't know, he didn't know really what was happening. And I asked Dad, I said, what's going on, Dad? What's wrong with Mom? And he said something that I never heard in my young life. He said, "I don't know." Dad was the answer man. Dad always knew what to do. He knew how to handle things. He said, "I don't know, son." And so the next Sunday, I can't remember what day of the week that was, but the following Sunday, we did something that we only did on Easter and Christmas, and that's we went to church. And before then, we'd only gone on Easter and sometimes at Christmas.
You know what they call those?
What's that?
CEOs.
CEOs.
Christmas and Easter only.
There you go. That's it.
I think it's a Brother Jerryism, I think.
That's a Jerryism. Hey, those are always top notch. But we went to this little church, and it was the stereotypical country church. I mean, it was in the middle of nowhere. They had a meeting room and then 2 rooms on the end of that. There was a bell tower and no indoor plumbing. It was wild. And we started going there on a regular basis. And then it wasn't long after that my dad got saved. Mom and Dad got baptized in the creek. And that became our life. Our life changed. And my mom and dad weren't drinkers, but there was alcohol in the house. And I can remember that all that was gone. You know, my dad was a smoker, a heavy smoker, and that was done. And he wasn't a very vulgar man, but there was no cursing anymore at all. And we were going to church all the time. Yeah. And so, and then I started hearing at church, and then from Mom and Dad, the gospel. I wouldn't have said at first what that was, but I knew. I started to understand what they were saying. And I'm going to Sunday school. I'm going to church. I'm hearing the gospel there and at home. And then about 1.5 years, 2 years after that, this has been my life now for a little bit. And my Uncle Richard, my mom's younger brother, was at the house. They made me go to bed at 9 o'clock, which I couldn't stand. Uncle Richard was over. I should be able to stay up. But they made me go to bed, and I disobeyed, and I crawled down the hallway so I could eavesdrop on what they were saying. And they were sharing the gospel with my Uncle Richard. And for the first time, it hit home that this is what I need to believe. I need to ask this Jesus that they're talking about. I believe he is who Mom and Dad are saying he is. I need to ask him to forgive me of my sins and to save me. And I crawled back to my bed and was just broken as a little 9-year-old boy and asked Christ to forgive me and to save me. And I told Mom and Dad what I did the next day. And so that's how I came to Christ. And then we were very faithful in that church. Mom and Dad were very faithful in that church. And there were some hiccups. There were some difficulties. That church split, but Mom and Dad handled that really well. This is an ugly aspect of Christianity, but it was very positive at the same time. So when I was 13, that church went through a split. I never knew that was going on until it happened. Mom and Dad never talked about that pastor, and that pastor was in the wrong. That's what led to the split. I think it needed to happen. This wasn't some type of personality cult or just somebody getting their nose bent out of shape and wanting to be the boss. This was a legitimate reason for this to happen because of what wasn't going on and wasn't being changed. And Mom and Dad never talked bad about that guy, never roasted him, never. And even when they told us what was going on, the way they explained it was just so different from what I'd heard from my friends in some cases. And so that Mom and Dad's example has been massive, in my life. I miss them. Both of them died in 2023. And then, I was a pretty faithful teenager up until around my senior year. And I really kind of got into as much of a rebellious phase as you can imagine. It wasn't off the charts at all, but it was just what I knew I shouldn't have been doing, and I was toying around with those things. I went into the Army, came back from the Army. I hadn't been serving the Lord very faithfully. I was very nominal in my faith during those Army years. And a preacher from Texas was doing a revival. This was the spring of '96. I'd been out of the Army for about 6 months. And his name was Ron Thomas. And the way the revival was set up, it was going to be Saturday night through Wednesday night. Saturday night, I was told, was called Meet the Preacher Night with supper. And I was living with Mom and Dad right then. My wife and our baby boy were, before we had gotten our own place. We'd only been out of the military for about 6 months. And so I thought it was my responsibility to go. But I just thought we was going to go have supper. And so we're getting ready to walk out the door, and Dad says, you know what? Because I was talking about a game I was wanting to watch when we got back from supper, and Dad said, we ain't going to have time to watch that game. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, after supper, there's a service. And guys, I'm not exaggerating. I was livid. I mean, I was so angry. And I said, you Baptists, that's exactly how I put it. I said, you Baptists cannot get together without somebody preaching at everybody else. I said, you can't just go and eat even. Why can't we just go eat and meet this guy and go home? And so, they showed great patience, my mom and dad. My little baby, he was probably a little upset. I got loud. And my wife was embarrassed because of my behavior. But mom and dad showed a lot of patience, and they just said, just try to have a good attitude about it, son. So after the supper, I go into the service, and, man, I was gripped with conviction. Brother Tom, it was Ron Thomas is who it was, who would become my future pastor and mentor and friend. And I was so gripped with conviction. And then Sunday morning, and I just was Sunday night, the dam broke. And I rededicated myself to following Christ. And it was a life changer. It was a trajectory changer. And from that, I began to meet with Brother Sparks, who was my pastor, regularly with a couple other guys. They were called to preach. I just was getting together with them because that's when he had free time to have a little more discipleship. And then it wouldn't but about 9-10 months later that I knew that God was calling me to be a preacher, to be a pastor. And so, Diana was on board with that. My mom and dad, I talked with them. They were on board with that. And I told Brother Sparks, and then I told the church. And the church affirmed that with the way they received me then and in the months and years to follow.
Amen.
So that's my story.
That's good. It's good. It's interesting, and it's interesting how God worked through your salvation, just kind of leading up to that. It was an eavesdrop. I mean, you heard it, right?
Yeah.
It was,
and I'd been hearing it,
right?
But that was the night, eavesdropping, and that's the way it always is. Why is it that some people during a preaching service, the person sitting next to this guy is absolutely broken, and the person right next to them is bored out of their mind and can't wait to get out of there? Yeah. That's a Holy Spirit thing. And but I had been hearing it, and that was the night that it sunk in.
We've talked about it, I think, a couple weeks in a row now of just, good, faithful, godly parents bringing their kids to church and being those examples. It's laying that foundation.
That's right.
And or plowing that field, and seeds are planted every time you go, and eventually the hope, right? That's where I'm at with my family, my girls.
Yeah.
Addie, right? It's, I'm not going to force her, I'm not going to twist her arm into having those conversations, but we're going to be at church every single time the door's open.
That's
and we're going to go to church camp, and we're going to make sure she's in an environment where she is hearing the gospel.
That's right.
So when she is able to comprehend, I'm there ready.
Right.
Or her mom, her grandparents, her pastor. I don't care who does it, honestly, as long as it gets done.
That's right.
It just sounded like
phenomenal.
It just sounded like a lot of discipline. That's the core. Yielding to the Spirit. That's the discipline. The be holy, for I am holy.
Uh-huh.
And unfortunately, I do think that there's a lot of Christians out there who they're saved, but that's it.
Right.
And that's where they stop. But it's a continual process of just yielding to the Spirit and having that discipline and keeping yourself in check every time, especially when times are difficult.
Sure.
Like being patient, even though someone's aggravated or their own kid's aggravated, and getting rid of things that could cause potential harm, like smoking.
Yes.
That's not just something that is affecting his health, but also, that's something you're seeing.
Sure. That's exactly right.
There's optics there for sure.
The same thing with the language. Everyone has their opinion on on cursing and whatnot, but it's not ever good to do, and your kids are going to be watching that.
And this was 1980, and I like to talk. I like to refer to it as just as a consistent faithfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And Dad wasn't saved until 1980, but he was. It was very much in that part of the country a Christian culture, and there was just this assumption, even among non-Christians, that Christians don't, drink, cuss, or chew, or go with girls who do. You didn't have to be a preacher or be in a church to know that little limerick.
Right.
And so, in Dad's mind especially, I'm saved, I've been changed, And so if I've been changed eternally, there's got to be some practical changes temporarily as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, and those were things that he associated, especially with the honky-tonk life. Now, and I'll tell you, he played the guitar and sang. I've known guys who they associate the guitar with the honky-tonks, but Dad definitely associated the foul language, the cigarettes, and the alcohol with that. But he went and he used the guitar and sang in church all the time, and it's just wisdom in saying just because it's what I used to do doesn't mean that now I get rid of all of it.
Right.
But there were some things he thought I got to get rid of.
Oh, for sure. Well, and having the discernment to know what those are. There's negatives in some of those things.
Like, can I use this to the glory of God?
Yeah.
Or can I not?
Right.
Yeah.
Guitar is a tool.
Absolutely.
Right? Hey, you can use it badly for sure.
Sure.
Or you can use it for good.
Right.
For God-centered purposes. But that's awesome. That's an amazing story. What was your involvement when you were in the military? Was it how long?
It was very nominal. So I was in for 4.5 years, and I was in from July of '91 till the end of '95, almost all of '95.
Gotcha.
And so there was actually a pretty sound church. I was stationed in Northern Virginia, and there was a pretty sound church in a town called Winchester, which was a decent little drive for us. It might have been like a half hour, but if you were to average it out, it would have been one Sunday a month for 4 years. Because the first half I was in basic training and in infantry school and airborne school.
MEPS.
Yeah. And then so the 4 years that I was in Virginia, we probably averaged one Sunday a month. But that's the average, because there were long periods where there'd be no church services, and then there'd be periods where we were a little hotter than that, and we were there on a regular basis. But if you averaged it out over those 4 years, it was once a month.
Gotcha. And no like active deployments or anything like that.
No, I was in during Desert Storm. I was in during the Mogadishu thing. If you've ever seen Black Hawk Down, that's Mogadishu. Yep. And I was in during Haiti. We had deployed to Haiti right as I was getting out, but my unit never got deployed to any of that.
Gotcha. What was your MOS?
My MOS was technically 11 Bravo Papa Charlie 2. So 11 Bravo is infantry, Papa is airborne training, and then Charlie 2 was a designation for I was a Dragon gunner. They don't even have it's an anti-tank missile. They don't even have those anymore. It's wire guided anti-tank missile.
Oh, like a TOW.
It was the forerunner to the TOW.
Gotcha. Good deal. So you exited the military.
Yeah.
And that rededication happened shortly after that.
So I got out of the military in November of '95 and rededicated myself in April of '96. Yeah.
And then you talked about like a trajectory change.
Yeah, absolutely. Because up until that point, I was only coming to church out of, I didn't want to offend mom and dad because at the time we were staying there. We were looking, and really it wasn't long after that we were able to find our own place. But I didn't. I wanted to keep the peace at home, And so if I wasn't going to church, they'd be on me, and I didn't want to argue. I didn't want to fight with them, and so we went. And I worked a job that I was working Sunday mornings, but I could go Sunday night, but I would have to go from work to church, and I used that as an excuse to not go. Yeah. And so I would only go on Wednesdays, and actually when that revival happened, I had just got a new job where I was working second shift. And so that's why, and that was brand new. That's another reason why I didn't want to go to church on Saturday, because I used to work 7 days a week. I worked a job Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, 36 hours, got paid for 40 if I made all 36. And then I worked for a janitorial service Monday through Thursday. And but I got this new job. It paid a lot better, and it was Monday through Friday. So I finally had my Saturdays and Sundays free. And then it's like the first or second Saturday, and I'm going to church. But God knew what He was doing.
Awesome, love it. Yeah, I mean the trajectory. And then you surrendered after that. What was that like? I mean, because I think Nick and I have our own story. I think everyone who's called to preach has some story about that call in their life and transpired? I mean, what was that like for you?
Okay, so when Sunday night of that revival service, and I rededicated myself. Our oldest son, who was just an infant, he was born July 4th, 95, and so he wasn't even a year yet. And he had to have a few surgeries. He has a rare genetic disorder called Mebius syndrome, and he was going to have a few. They were just mainly cosmetic surgeries, but yet still, when your kid's going to have a surgery, he's not even a year old yet. It's serious.
That's big.
Yeah. And so when I went forward that night, the whole congregation's thinking it's because I'm worried about Luke. And obviously I'm concerned about Luke, but God had broken my heart, and I was rededicating myself. And that's because I was audibly and visibly weeping, when I was up at the altar with Brother Sparks. And I'll never forget, he even told me, I was trying to talk to him for a while, and he was laughing. He said, "Travis, I can't understand you." And so I had to collect myself. And it was just, I was broken over my, sinful backsliddenness, and God had gotten through, and it was awesome. That night we got home, and I told Dad, I said, "Hey, I need to call Brother Sparks." He said, "What for?" I said, I want him to know I'm serious. I said, "This isn't an emotional outburst. This isn't just, this is not just a feeling tonight. I'm serious about this." And I called him and I said, "I am going to make it to the church services. And if I show up dirty and sweaty from work, I'm going to be faithful. I'm not back. I need to be under the preaching of the word. I need to be around the fellowship of the saints." And I said, "But I also, I would like to meet with somebody outside of that." And he said, "I'll tell you what." He said, "I'm meeting with a couple guys on Saturday mornings." And he said, "You can join us." He said, "We meet at 8 o'clock on Saturday morning." He said, "It's in my house, and you could join us." He said, "Now, here's the caveat." He said, both these guys are called to preach. And he said, "We're walking through Jerry Locke's ministry training manual."
There you go.
He said, "But it's a Bible study." He said, and even though you're not called to preach, we're walking through the scriptures. Every believer is a minister. That's something that he taught, and that's something that I firmly believe in.
Yeah.
Every believer's called to the ministry. Not every believer is called to be a pastor or church planter,
right,
but every believer is called to minister. And so I said, "Yeah, man, I'm up for that." I said, I'm serious. I'm serious about this. This wasn't. And so I started meeting with those guys, and we were walking through that ministry training manual, and whatever I needed to do, whatever he needed me to do at the church, I would do. I was taking the trash out. I was running the tape ministry. I was just whatever they needed me to do, and they needed somebody to help in the youth department. There was a hole there, and I never had any kind of calling for that, but my calling was to help where the church needed help. And they said, "Will you help? We want you to shadow this guy and then eventually start helping him teach the class." And I said, "Yeah, I'll do that." And so I was just being faithful in those things. And over time, and my wife was all in too. She wasn't recalcitrant in all this. She wasn't. I mean, she jumped. She was following my leadership, and she was all in that. And so we're being very faithful. We're getting plugged in wherever we can serve. And over time, there's just, as I'm studying the scriptures and engaged, I'm getting this sense that, God wants me to train to be a pastor. He wants me to train to be a preacher. I'm feeling so fulfilled when I teach, and we go to nursing homes. I would do so, and there was just such a joy in studying to teach, and such a fulfillment in that. And the first person I talked to was Diana, and she was all on board. She wasn't against that at all. She was all on board with that. Then I talked to Mom and Dad, and they thought that's what they had been seeing, in my life, and that was on track. And so then I talked to Brother Sparks, and he acted like he was just waiting on me, to make that public. And so then I made it public to the church, and it's the same thing. The church said, "We've been seeing this coming," and then so that was 97, and then maybe about a year or so later, the church licensed me to preach, and I'd preach a little more often. And then it was about a year or so after that Brother Sparks asked me to join his staff. And that was March 1st of 1999, and I've been in vocational ministry ever since. I've gotten to the point where I don't call it full-time ministry. I'm almost borderline anal about the way we use some words, because if you have any kind of ministry, it's full-time.
Yeah.
But not all of it is vocational.
Sure.
And I've pastored before where I was bivocational, but it was a full-time pastorate.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Well, the office demands that.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So to call it anything else is
It's to cheapen it, what you're
to
doing.
diminish it. Yeah. I agree with that. Yeah. I think, I think I first met you when I was in youth group. I think, you
Probably.
were at Rodgers.
Yeah. When I was on staff at Rodgers.
Yeah.
And see, I was on staff for Brother Sparks from 99 to like 2006. And in 2006, I went to pastor a church in western Indiana. It was a town called Greencastle, Indiana. And I pastored there from early in 2006 to the end of 2009. And Brother Thomas had asked me to join him at Rodgers on staff.
Yep.
And so from 2009 until I went to Kentucky to pastor in 17, I was there.
Yeah, in my mind, growing up, you were the youth leader at Rodgers.
Yeah,
Like
that's right. That's right.
As I grew up, you were always the guy.
Yeah.
There's several years as we were growing up through Lake Worth, youth group.
Yeah,
we'd
sure.
come to the conferences and things. But I love that. I mean, I didn't want to stop you, but I mean, I think we all have a similar story on you feel this call to preach or to be more involved, and the first place that you go is your wife,
right?
And you say,
absolutely,
hey, listen, I'm confident that this is what the Lord is telling me to do, and the response is telling.
Yes,
Diana, Haley, Crystal, I think they all kind of had the same reaction. Like they were almost more convinced in it than I was at the time. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go.
Yeah.
And like I think that's a sign.
Sure.
Right? That's a confirmation. The congregation saying, yeah, we've known this for a while.
That's right.
Confirmation. Other people, trusted peers, that's what happened with me. I mean, I told Tom, I was like, hey, I think this is gonna happen. I think this is the way we're going. He's like, it's about time, bro. That's what he told me. I was like, was I the only one that didn't know? But it's those micro confirmations that just affirms like, hey, this is what God wants for you.
And that's all going to be in the context of the church, and your family,
That's right.
and through the scriptures, and that's where that gets affirmed and confirmed.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if it was like this for y'all, but like every desire of mine, like when I got out of high school, I started at 19 to ministry. I'm 26 now. And in 19, you're trying to figure out your career, what your life's going to be like, and just like nothing. I was trying to do everything but preaching,
right?
Because you take a introvert kid and have this calling of being in front of everybody on stage all the time, ministering to people. I was trying to avoid that all I could, and so I was trying to find all these different things I'd want to do, and just like I'd do them for a week or a month or whatever, and then I just I couldn't. And my mind would just keep going right back to the same thing over and over and over to surrender to the call. And it was like, it just felt like every desire of mine was just diminishing each time until I was like, okay, fine. And then this one just kept going with the fuse.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. God was blessing things, and he was, and I was finding so much enjoyment in that. Yeah, I don't subscribe to the theory that if you like what you're doing, then you must be out of God's will.
Sure.
I don't think that makes, unless what you like doing is sin. Then that's the problem.
It's for sure out of God's will.
That's right. But and God was just blessing those things, and I love the idea of being used in that kind of capacity, and there's always these stereotypes that you have, or these assumptions, and some assumptions are good and some aren't. But so I was, in 1997, I'd have been like, I was 21, 24, and I was thinking, I never hadn't heard of anybody at 24, 25 who'd been called to preach. There was always younger guys.
Sure.
And so that was kind of interesting to me. And I had, we had one son, and we had just had the second son, and so all those things were because it was atypical to what I had heard in the past or seen in the past. But those things aren't the standard. The standard is the word through the church.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, it's been amazing. Just the desire change.
Yeah.
Like I was telling, we were walking up here talking about this, about, like I was involved before, absolutely.
Yeah.
But there's a different mentality now. It's like I don't want to be anywhere else.
Right.
But in the church and helping the church and loving the people of the church, it's I can't think of a better place to be or anything else I want to do.
Right.
Like I'm obsessed now with it.
Yeah.
A healthy obsession, but it's amazing. It's amazing.
Well, especially the more that you're in it, and the more you're like discipled, like Zach taking me on, and then just being able to meet other preachers like you,
Sure.
and like Tyler Prater, and stuff from Brother Jerry and Daryl Sparks, meeting all these well-versed pastors now, and just having that influence and getting to see kind of like what happens
Right.
behind the scenes a little bit, because initially when you surrender, you're just like, it's just preaching.
Yeah.
But then when you finally get to kind of see behind the curtain, you're like, oh,
Right.
there's a lot more. And
Sure.
I think that scares a lot of people.
Yeah.
And then you see also, either it's going to scare you and you're going to run off, or it's going to be like, all right, well, now I'm definitely more all in. This is more serious than I thought.
Sure. And what I've been so blessed by is, Brother Sparks was my first pastoral mentor. And nobody's had a bigger impact on me than my dad. And he was never in the ministry like as a pastor, but like I talked about, he and Mom were just consistently faithful. He and Mom just consistently faithful. He was what they called a Sunday school superintendent. He was a church clerk, and he was that forever. And he was very serious about doing those jobs well. It just wasn't just kind of halfway doing it. He wanted to do those jobs well because he was working, as Colossians says, as unto the Lord, not just for Daryl Sparks or to power trip, because I've got an office, in the church. And he was very faithful in doing those things, and a great example. But Brother Sparks, the way he approached the scriptures, and you guys are familiar with his preaching, and you guys have sat under his, not just his teaching, but his teaching from the pulpit, but also his teaching about preaching. And so that was modeled for me, 3 times a week. The approach to the text, the handling of the text, the not a force of personality, not leading by a force of personality, not having a shtick, not having so he wasn't just a showman behind the pulpit. He was an expositor. And I would have never used that term at the time, but that was the example. And so the Bible did the speaking. The Bible was the authority, not Daryl Sparks, the Bible. And he demonstrated how to live that way and how to open up the scriptures. And so then when I started working with him, we're having those kind of conversations. He's modeling that when I'm preaching. We're talking about how I arrived where I did and how that how all that went, and he's guiding me in that, and that was excellent. One of the coolest discipleship times is we'd get together. It transitioned from me and those other 2 guys, and later on it was just me and him. And he said, look, he said, you set the agenda. You tell me what you have a question about. You tell me a week ahead of time, and whatever your question is, he said, we'll talk about it for an hour. And that was big. That was helpful for me.
Yeah.
So he was kind of like my Chat GPT.
Well, I mean, being mentored by, in our circles, one of the greatest.
Yeah.
One of the greatest to do it. It's phenomenal.
And then Brother Thomas, so those 2 guys have been my primary mentors in the ministry, and both are different guys. Personality-wise, the way they present themselves, the way they interact. Even the way they preach as far as in their presentation, but here's where they're the same. They're the same where it matters. They love this. They're committed to the scriptures. They love Christ. They're churchmen, and their wives. They love their wives. They have excellent relationships with their wives, and their wives are all in. And it was great for me to see 2 totally different guys, but the main thing and the plain thing is what they shared, and they were in lockstep with that. And so that was cool to me because we could be a little bit different in some areas, and that's cool. But what's the most important thing? We're in lockstep. And so, I look at my ministry now, and Brother Sparks has had the biggest impact on me in the way I preach, and Brother Thomas has had the biggest impact on me in the way I lead and the way I pastor. And I'm just, I just thank God. I mean, those guys were my seminary. And I'm all for formal education, and I've got one and working on more, but nothing can eclipse local church training.
Yeah.
So valuable, so good.
Yeah.
Because you're in the field. It's the most practical form of that you can experience.
And that's the biblical model, right?
I would agree with that. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Well, like I've learned. It took me learning in seminary because I'm when you're trying to learn how to preach or how to lead and stuff, you're naturally just wanting to like grab onto and trying to be just like the person who's teaching you. But what I learned in seminary was just preach the word, number one, first, and then just be you. Like don't try to be Jerry Locke. Don't try to be Zach Hatton. Be you, because the moment you try to act like anybody else, people are gonna see right through it.
It's noticeable.
Right. That's exactly right.
Well, and it takes time. Like you're going to have to find who that person is, right?
Yeah.
If you emulate, anybody, right? People are going to see that. Mm-hmm. It's obvious, but it takes time to figure out through preaching the word and doing things with a spirit of excellence and orderly, and being faithful. Well, your characteristics and how you present and how you do certain things and how you conduct yourself, you'll build those things.
Yeah, sure.
You'll build your own personality that's perceived by others, but at first that's not
right.
That's not what you should focus on.
Right.
Well, and the way I like to look at that is you're gonna find your own voice. I'll put it that way. Mm-hmm. But the voices of those people who have impacted you are going to be unmistakable. So even several years ago, I was at a funeral. Dad was still alive, but we were at a funeral of a family friend, of people that we hadn't seen in a long time. But I recognized this fella. And so I walked up to him and I introduced myself. I was in my 40s. I'm 53 now, but I was in my 40s then. And he probably hadn't seen me for 30 years. And so I told him, I said, I'm Jimmy Gilbert's boy. And he goes, I knew that just by watching you walk. Yeah. And so I'll never forget the first time I spoke at a conference. I was at Jerry Summey's church. Used to host a conference, they did it for a little bit, and he asked me to preach at that conference, and I was floored, and I did. And at the end of that service, I was pastoring in Greencastle, Indiana. But at the end of that service, several of those guys said, we could tell Brother Sparks' influence on you. Mm-hmm. So that's going to that's going to happen. You're going to develop your own voice, but and so it makes it important who's impacting us.
Yeah, that's right.
It still comes naturally.
Yes, that's right.
Without you realizing.
Yeah, no, it's great. So you're doing youth ministry at Rodgers at this point. At what point were you called to the other church was it Tennessee?
In Kentucky.
Kentucky.
Okay, so when I came to Rodgers, I was pastoring a church, and so when Brother Thomas called me, and that was a cool day. I was bivocational. I get home from the office. It was a Wednesday night, and it was after the conference. He had asked me to preach at that conference that year. Mm. It was my first time preaching in the evening at that conference, and so that was about a month after that. And I come home from work and I go to my office to kind of make my final preparations just to get my head right to preach. And I listen to my voicemail, and it's Brother Travis, it's Brother Ron Thomas, Rodgers Baptist Church, Garland, Texas. Like I didn't know, And give me a call back, would you? And I was like, whoa. And I walked across to the parsonage immediately, and I told Diane, I said, you'll never guess who left me a voicemail and want me to call him. And she says, well, who is it? I said, it's Ron Thomas. And she said, what could he want? I said, and he was short-staffed at the time.
Yeah.
I said, I think he's wanting me to talk to him about joining his staff. So, and when we talked, he said, I know you're pastoring. He said, and I'm not asking you to come here to be a youth pastor. He said, this is exactly what he told me. He said, I want help with leadership, and And that's a hole for us right now. And so you would be shepherding our young people. And so, Di and I prayed about that. And, we were all in. And so, I never really went there to be just, and I don't like how the word just sounds there, but I never went there just to be in that cookie cutter position, right. But that needed leadership. And so that's where we started. And, and God blessed that. And just one thing led to another. He shared all kind of ministry with me. So I was never just in that track. But that was a primary responsibility of leadership for the first few years that I was there. I was on staff with him for almost 8 years. It was like 7.5. And for the first 3 years, that was my primary area. Youth and outreach was my primary area of responsibility. And, I would go to Mexico with him. I'd take mission trips together, and it just kind of, morphed from there. By the time I left, there was somebody else that was leading the youth and day-to-day operations. But what happened was there's actually a church in Kansas that was needing a pastor, and they asked me if I'd be willing to candidate. And I loved Texas. I'm one of those guys who's not a native, but I couldn't wait to get there. Even as a kid, people don't believe this. They think I'm making it up. But even as a kid, I wanted to go to Texas. I wanted a vacation in Texas. I asked Mom and Dad if we could vacation in Texas. It never happened. But so I loved being in Texas. I loved being at Rodgers. And when this church in Kansas asked me if I'd be willing to be a candidate, I really took a long time to answer that. And my first answer was no. But then, and guys, I'm a rock solid sleeper. Like I've gotten 2 excellent nights of sleep here at camp. I sleep really well everywhere I'm at. But that night, when I told that pulpit committee, no, you can't consider me, I bet you I slept for 30 minutes that entire night. It's never happened to me before, or really since. And Dinah knew something was wrong with me. She said, "What's the matter with you?" And I said, I think that I gave them the wrong answer because I don't want to leave Rodgers and I don't want to leave Texas. And she says, "Well, call them back." And I said, "I will sound like a horse's butt, if I call them back and tell them that." And she says, "Well, what will you be if you don't?" And so,
that's a good question.
Yeah. So I called him back, and he was happy to hear from me. And so that led, because of responsibilities at Rodgers, this was May. I couldn't get up there until September. And, we went through this whole thing, questions and answers. And I went up there, and it was a whole weekend. And I was convinced that they were going to call me to preach. But now here's my problem. Call me to pastor. But here's my problem now. I'm also convinced that I don't think that's where I'm supposed to be. And now I've got a lot of questions. I'm thinking, well, God, what was the whole deal? If this is not where you want me to be, then why put me through that when it came to the issue? And they called me, but I just really believed I needed to have 100%. I'm not 100% vote guy, like it's a rule, but I really believed in that setting I needed to have 100%, and we didn't get it. And when they voted again, they voted it multiple times, and they didn't get it. And I just said no. And so I didn't know what all that was about. I thought that was weird, but we were confident. Me and Dinah both were confident that that was the right decision to turn them down. And 2 months later, Kentucky called. And we went through all of that, and we just knew that that's where God was leading us. And I followed a guy there that had been pastor for 35 years, and he was a legend. He was a legend in that church. He was a legend in that community. It's a very small rural community right on the edge of Appalachia, not too far from where my people were from originally. And it was great. We went there. I was thinking I would be buried there. And I still love Texas and still miss Rodgers. And we had a long connection. Our oldest kid stayed in Garland. We'd be back and forth for them and for the missions conference and those kind of things. But it was great following the legend. And he stayed in the church. He next to Diana, him and his wife were my biggest fans and my biggest supporters. And he did things that just really helped solidify my position as the pastor. But it was a big learning curve. I mean, there was an associate at that church that had wanted to be the next pastor, and the church was split on whether to call him or not. And they'd voted for him. They'd voted on him, and he didn't get the vote. At that church's constitution, it was not a simple majority; it was a supermajority. Actually, it was more than a supermajority. You had to have 75%, and he didn't get it. And but there was the church leadership wanted him to stay on staff, and I agreed to that. That would be a topic for another podcast.
Sure.
And he and his wife and his family were sweet, and they loved the Lord, and they really did all they could to work well there. But it's just odd,
Yeah.
you know. And so they left after a few years, but it was a really good. You know, it was a really good training time on all kind of levels. And I was there for over 6 years when Brother Thomas kind of suddenly retired.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in January of 23, my dad died. And our middle son, who was living in Houston now this time and married, he had just bought a house. And Dad was a machinist by trade. He was a carpenter by love. And he made a lot of furniture. I've got a lot of furniture in my house that he made. And he knew that Noah had bought this house. And one of the last conversations he had with Noah, there was a bookcase at Mom and Dad's that Dad had made, and that was a gift. He was gifting that to Noah in Madison for their new place. So we had furniture that we were taking out there, and that bookcase. So we were in Houston. We were in Texas, down in Houston, and we had just been in Garland. We loved that church. We loved the Thomases so much. We went from Kentucky to Houston through Garland. It's not the way to go, but that's the way we did it.
Yeah.
And that was on Monday night. We were at the Thomases, and then we got down to Houston on Tuesday night. We're helping Loa's house get set up. I mean, it's all day Tuesday, all day Wednesday. Well, Wednesday night we've been out to eat with the family, and my phone starts blowing up from people in Rodgers. Boom, boom, and that wasn't necessarily uncommon. You know, I'd hear from those folks. We'd communicate, but the volume, and just is repeated, because I wasn't answering the phone because I was using the GPS. I was in a part of Houston I didn't know, but I just kept getting. So I told Diana, I said, I think something has happened. You know, I hope Brother Thomas is okay.
Yeah.
And then when I finally start making phone calls back, they tell me what happened. He said, your Brother Thomas has announced his retirement tonight, and most of the church just knew, just from conversation, that we were going to be there. We stayed in their house Monday night. And I said, man, I didn't know. He never said anything to me about it. I said, he seemed fine to me, because they were worried. You know, was he not feeling well? I said, no, man, everything was cool. And he just, if you know Brother Thomas, none of it is out of character. He had decided it was time for him to step back.
Yeah.
And when And Brother Thomas is the ultimate turn-the-page guy. Let's move forward. He doesn't move forward looking back. And it's one of the things I respect, you know, the most about him. And so it was time. He was convinced it was time. He announced his retirement. I'm going to retire in 2 weeks, and I'm moving forward. This church is well trained. That was his perspective. This church is well trained, and they know what to do, and they know who to look for. And so that was. He wouldn't tell anybody that's the way to do it. He just thought that's the way he needed to do it. You know, everybody's got. Your brother Jerry Locke took. You know, I'm exaggerating, but he took 7 years to transition.
A long time.
But you know, the guys are different. So, and we could have comments about, you know, which way is best. But anyway, that night, so one of those phone calls that people kept calling, and I took a while to call back. It was one of the deacons. And when I finally got to call, because I was calling people back in order, and when I finally called his number back, I could tell that I was on with all the deacons. You know, he answered, but I could tell immediately that I was on speaker, and then the rest of them, hey Trav, and they had become, that was the deacons, and they had become the pulpit committee in one night, and they didn't know they were going to be.
You're up. You're up. Let's go.
And so, and they said to me, and the first thing I said to them was, I said, fellas, I've had a couple conversations. I've heard what's happened. I said, you know, I'm sure my head's spinning as much as yours.
Yeah.
And they said, yeah. you've heard that. So here's what we'd like. We'd like you to come and be our candidate for our next pastor. That's what they said. And that meant a lot to me.
Yeah.
Because these were guys that all of those guys, there were 7 of them. All 7 of those guys were deacons when I was the associate pastor there. And all 7 of them had worked with me and knew me as that number 2 guy. And for them, I mean, it's only a half hour after the service is over, if that. It might not even be that much.
Yeah.
And for them to call me that quick in unanimity and say, and it was funny. They said, what they said was, we want you to be the next pastor. They said, we can't call you. The church has to call you. I said, yeah, I understand. I understand how that works. And they said, but will you come? And I said, fellas, in my head's spinning now. Mm-hmm. And I said, my gut, because I love this church and I love these people. I said, my gut reaction is to say yes. I said, but we got to, Di and I got to talk about this. We got to pray about this.
Yeah, slow it down a little bit. Yeah.
And I said, we scheduled a time for me to get back with them. And so Diane and I mean, you talk about a conversation and some prayer that night. I mean, that was wild. That was one of those conversations where your wife is kind of standing off to the side and she's looking at you the whole time you're talking. It's like, and you're talking and you're mouthing things to her, and it was wild. And then and I wanted to talk to my mom. So my dad had died just a week, but we had just buried Dad the week before. Mm. And Mom had cancer as well, but it was in remission. And where I lived in Kentucky, I was only 2.5 hours from her. And that was huge with Dad. I mean, I was up there every week, with helping them. And so I just, it just kind of makes me emotional. But I was just talking through that with Mom. And Mom said, I said, Mom, if you don't like the idea of me being so far away, there's no way I consider doing that. I want to be able to help you just as I've been helping Dad. And Mom said, Travis, she said, Bible is a great church and you're doing a great work there. She said, but I have never thought that any place was as perfect for you as Rodgers. Mm. Not even the church where I grew up, where she was still. Yeah. And she said, this is not some type of coincidence. This is not, she said, if you think that this is the place for you, she says, I'm all in for that. And that, that meant the world to me. Yeah. And Josh Pettyjohn was on staff at Rodgers at the time, and I wanted to get his take, because I had been at a church before where the associate wasn't somebody that I'd hired, and had his own kind of way of doing things, and I wanted to see where he's at. I didn't want to walk through that again, and so we had a good conversation, and he seemed like he was all for that, and kind of liked the idea that somebody who knew the church and knew Rodgers would be, as opposed to somebody who would be completely outside the culture. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, we got to the point where we would have that conversation again with the deacons. And I say, guys, if you want to move forward with this, we're on board with it. And so that was January 23, and they voted in March of 23, and Easter Sunday of 23 was my first Sunday. So. It was wild.
Starting off with a bang.
It was wild, man.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, it definitely sounded like that was where God needed you to be.
Yeah.
The path that led you back there, how easy it was, how quickly. I mean, the first thing that came to my mind, right, was Brother Thomas possibly, did he have that in mind as well? When he said, hey, the church is well trained.
Right.
I mean, there had to be some kind of, at least a thought or two of, hey, Travis could do this.
Yeah. That's something I've never asked him about. I would love, and I don't know how he'd answer that. I do know this. I mean, he told me after I went to Bible, because we would talk. We talked about the conference. We would talk, and he told me after Bible that he said, I would, because somebody told him when I left for Kentucky, somebody said to him, well, I thought he'd be my next pastor. Which I kind of wish they hadn't said that because they had a pastor. You know, that doesn't always get received well.
Sure,
I don't think he never told me who that person was, and I never asked, and I don't think that the person was trying to drop a hint or whatever else, or trying to say, why don't you go? But I don't think that was the case at all. I just think the person was surprised. You know, when we announced to Rodgers that we were going to Bible, there was an audible. It just, nobody could, nobody thought. Yeah. I think a lot of people assumed that I would be the next pastor, Rodgers. And and he told me on that, he said, Brother Travis, he said, I'd love it if you'd follow me here. He said, but I'm not ready to stop. And I said, well, I don't think anybody wants you to stop. And this was like back in 2018 or something like that. Yeah. So I do think, if I could be so bold, I think he was, and he's been nothing but supportive of us, and he's very happy that I was called as a pastor and that me and Diane are there, and he repeatedly says that. Now, whether he was thinking that, I'm not 100% sure. He did tell me when we talked, when we finally talked after he stepped down and before they called me, he said, well, I'm sure they've called you, right? He said, because I was thinking that you'd be one of the first phone calls that they'd make.
Yeah.
And
who speaks a lot to, I mean, it's such the organization there at Rodgers and the community, the congregation there, you've cultivated a community of just rock solid men of God who have been trained on how to handle situations like this. And there was enough faith in them, granted, maybe a little sudden, maybe a little unorthodox, right? Yeah. But God used all of that.
Right.
And, I mean, you tell this story, I mean, it's almost unbelievable how quickly things moved and things that worked out, that God opened doors and positioned things to work out seamlessly. Only he can do that.
Right.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
That's true. And it's speculation to if I hadn't have been there so long, and those kind of things, would he have retired that way? I don't know.
Yeah, who knows?
But everybody's a little different.
Yeah.
And I do know this. We never talked about retirement and transition much when I was on staff. And I would tell people this only happened a couple times if people kind of would play the canard about me being next or whatever. I said, look, I came here to serve this church as his associate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm here. I'm not here to be the next guy. Mm-hmm. But I got to the point where I thought if that's what God would want, I'm all in on that. But I knew I did know that he never felt comfortable in having some type of formal apparatus where he would put forward the guy who would be potentially next.
Sure.
And that was just his comfort level. Yeah. That wasn't him saying that it was wrong or unbiblical. That's just not where he was comfortable doing.
Yeah. My mindset around it, when we're talking about this specifically, about, preachers having kind of like a runner-up or like an expectation. I think that's kind of the way to look at it is, I think an associate pastor should be surprised by a call.
Uh-huh.
You shouldn't ever think that you are a shoo-in.
Yeah.
Or that you deserve it, or it's, the expectation. Unless it's been stated, right? Unless you've had that conversation.
And that's the key. It can never be assumed.
Right.
Yeah.
Because something's going to crash and burn. Mm-hmm. But if it's planned and it's communicated, and the church is all on board, then it's going to happen really well.
Yeah.
But if it's just kind of this assumption, and how could they not know? Well, you're setting yourself up for failure.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and you're putting yourself in front of the Holy Spirit. And, work it. I mean, it's just, get out of the way.
Right.
But that definitely makes sense. And I mean, it's obvious that this is where God wants you. And it's amazing to see what you guys, I mean, decades and decades and decades, what you've done at through Rodgers Baptist Church. I mean,
well, from until April of 23 or until March of 23, they'd only had 2 pastors for 70 years.
That's wild.
Brother Ron and then Brother Charles before that.
Yeah.
And the guy that Brother Charles followed, I can't remember off the top of my head, but he'd been there for maybe close to a decade, coming on a decade. And I mean, the only reason they need to call Brother Charles is because that guy had a heart. I mean, he got ill and died.
Yeah.
As the pastor, and so a lot of stability.
Yeah.
So
we need churches like that.
Yeah.
Kind of transitioning a little bit here on that stability and some of the ministries of Rodgers. One of the longest ministries I can think of that we've participated in or been part of is that missions conference that you guys are so faithful to host every year. And I mean, just your missions work in general that comes out of Rodgers Baptist Church I don't really see it elsewhere, to be honest with you, to that caliber, to that scale, if you will, that volume. Maybe talk a little bit about how that started. And I know there's kind of a youth conference that goes along with it. In my mind, I wonder, was that created so that the kids had somewhere to go? Well, that
it's probably It's probably a both and when it comes to that.
Yeah.
So this is going to be the 58th of this year's conference, which is July 20th through the 22nd, Monday through Wednesday night, is the 58th missions conference of Rodgers Baptist Church. And I think one of the things that's unique about our missions conference is that it's an open conference. And by open, I mean it's not just for Rodgers Baptist Church.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of churches that will have a missions conference that is to focus on missions, to educate their church on missions, to raise funds for missions, and to maybe take on another missionary or two. And I think those conferences are awesome. I've participated in meetings like that for other churches. But our conference is a networking conference. And as independent Baptists, I mean, really, one of the things that makes us independent, to me, is it's the most important aspect of what it means to be independent, is that our cooperation is an unaffiliated cooperation. It's a church-to-church cooperation as opposed to a official affiliated cooperation through, like the SBC's cooperative program.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, our cooperation is based church to church. Now, the benefit of the way the SBC does it is, it's really seamless. You just give X amount of dollars to the cooperative program, and then it goes to all these different efforts. The problem with that is there's no direct church oversight. It becomes a bureaucratic mess, in my opinion. Yeah. But the way we do it is church to church, and there's relationships, and there's local church authority over these different ministries, and I think it's a better model. There's a lot of difficulties. There's a lot of logistical kind of difficulties that come with that, but that's all right. I think it's a better model overall. But so we're not about being isolated. We're not about being, the independent isn't what we emphasize. It's we cooperate. So we need to be able to have friends. We need to be able to network. We need to be able to meet, and that meeting is perfect for meeting new missionaries, strengthening fellowships, being able to establish appointments to have a ministry present to your church, and it allows pastors to meet these guys, and I don't want to use the word vet, but have an opportunity to get to know them as opposed to just a conversation on the phone or an email.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it's a good time for us to cooperate together in ministry and strengthen friendships, and that's important.
Yeah.
And so that's what that conference has been doing for 58 years. Now, I wish I could remember how long the youth conference has been going on, but I know it started in the late 90s, sometime in the late 90s. And because our missions conference is in the summer, there's all these missionaries' kids and pastors' kids and other church kids, they're there.
Yeah.
And so the youth pastor at the time was a guy named Brian Alvis. He was burdened to do something specific with and for these kids, and so that's where the youth conference was born out of that.
Yeah.
And it's been a great. I think it's been a great thing. And so this year, the youth conference speakers are going to be Travis Jones, pastor of Highland Missionary Baptist Church in El Reno, and then Quentin Locke.
Oh, nice.
Is going to be the other speaker at our missions conference. And, of course, the Lake Worth Praise Team has been a part of that for a long time. A long time now. And that's a great partnership.
As long as we've done Timberline as well. I mean, we
it really I I'm wanting to say that my first missions conference as a staff member of Rodgers was 2010. I got there in 2009, but the conference in 10 was the first. And we may have done the music that year, but I'm wanting to say Lake Worth has been working with us from 11 or 12.
That's
on.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember the first year I went, it was, I guess y'all's church doing
our
it.
guys,
then,
some of our
then
guys
very
doing
next year we started doing it.
It's one of like the three things we do, big external things that we do a year, and we always look forward to it. It's interesting because it's like right after camp, right? It's like you just keep going, right?
Sure.
Keep the pedal on the floor, but yeah, it's such a great ministry that you guys provide and have been so faithful to not only put on but do very, very well.
It's a well-oiled machine, and our church really. I mean, this is the 58th one now, so we've done 57 of these, and some of the people, not all, but some of the people have been there for all of them, and so it's a well-oiled machine, and the evening is kind of typical, like it has been. We have evening sessions. Where we'll have a missions presentation and a preaching service and then time to fellowship. But this will be the third year. One of the changes I've made is during the daytime, so Tuesday and Wednesday, I wanted to kind of have a seminar style daytime services where we would break off into smaller groups and have speakers who were talking on specific topics that would really be practical ministry helps for local and global settings. And we'd offer 4 of those seminars over the course of 2 different sessions. And the conference attendees get to pick 2 of those 4 to go to, and then we kind of rotate. So it helps move the day along quicker. You're moving around, and it gives you an opportunity to engage with the speaker as opposed to just listening to a talk. And I certainly don't think there's anything wrong with just listening to the talk, but it's also positive to be able to have that interaction. And so, like this year, Brother Sparks, he's going to be doing what I call theology in practice. So every believer is a minister, and every minister ought to be a theologian. How do we have a solid biblical theology, and that's got to be put in practice. It's not just about education. So he's going to do a session on theology and practice. Bruce Martin, he's the son of a missionary. He's the father of missionaries. He's been a missionary really his whole adult life, and so raised on the mission field. I think there's a disconnect sometimes when it comes to these missionary families, especially the kids. They're raised on a mission field, and no matter how fluent they become in that language and no matter how familiar they become with that culture, they're not native to that culture. But then when they come home to the States, they're not native here either. They've never lived here. And so there can be this big disconnect, and he's going to be speaking both Tuesday and Wednesday on understanding and serving our missionary families. And I'm really looking forward to that. Brian, Robert Creech is talking about how and why we do indigenous missions. So the way we understand missions is it's not just about establishing American kingdoms and foreign fields. It's about helping plant churches and train nationals to do the work of the ministry. And nobody does that better than Robert Creech. And who's available to have speak, and he's going to do that. There's a guy, Brady Blevins, an adjunct professor at Arlington Baptist University. He's going to be talking about what is truth. He's an apologist with the Watchman Fellowship. He's a children's pastor at Walnut Ridge Baptist Church in Mansfield, and he's going to do an excellent job talking about what is truth. A new friend of mine named Preston Condra, who's an evangelist and trains people to do evangelism. He's going to be doing a session on how to start gospel conversations and answer objections. I'm really looking forward to that. Then your pastor, Zach Hatton, is going to be doing a session on establishing a culture of mentorship, in a church. Yeah. And then Pat Briney, Dr. Briney, he's going to be doing an alter ego. He's going to be Dr. Evolution. And so I don't know if you guys have ever seen that before. He's done that before in different settings, but he's going to be Mr. Dr. Evolution, and the people in his seminar are going to try to stump him, and they won't be able to, most likely, and he's going to help train them on how to engage with really that kind of mentality. So
that sounds great. I'll definitely be in attendance. Yeah, that sounds phenomenal. Give us the dates again.
It's July 20th through the 22nd. So the 20th is Monday night, 22nd is Wednesday night. Those seminar sessions I just described, they'll take place in the morning on the 21st and the 22nd.
Gotcha.
How many missionaries do you have go to this thing?
That's always, it just depends on the year. Right now, I'm wanting to say we have at least 10 missionaries who are pre-registered.
Okay.
And this is, we're a month out, or a little less than a month out now, 3 weeks out. And so we have quite a few. There's Daniel Pearson, who is a church planner in inner city Cincinnati. Matthew Barnes, who has a ministry to the Indiana legislative body. It's pretty cool. Andres Falconet, Tim Delaney, a young guy named Caleb Turk. Those are just some of the ones I can think of right off the top of my head. A fellow named Eric Joss out of Oshkosh, Wisconsin, who has a really cool ministry called the Masters Craftsman Institute. They've all pre-registered, and there's a few others that I'm not able to think of off the top of my head. But so we're going to have a good showing, I think, with missionaries this year. Sam Verghese, longtime missionary in India, is going to be there. So
yeah, Sam's solid. Well, thanks for that, Travis.
Well, thank you
for everything you do, your faithfulness for a long time. I've said this a few times, but I do think that when it comes to independent Baptist churches, sometimes you can get stuck in that vein of, hey, we're not supposed to collaborate, or we're not supposed to really lean on other churches. I don't know if that's the case.
Right.
And I would say throughout the years, I think Rodgers and Lake Worth Baptist Church have probably been some of the closest sister churches to each other. So I love everything.
Well, we
you do.
need each other, and we love Lake Worth, and that church has been a great blessing to me over the years. Your former pastor, Brother Locke, has been a great friend, and just his personal ministry and preaching and his writing ministry has benefited me like crazy, and I love that church. And I love Zach. He's a good friend. I've loved getting to know you guys and serve with you guys, and I love the collaboration we have as individuals and as churches especially.
Absolutely. Wouldn't trade it for the world. But seriously, thanks for taking the time today. I know it's a busy camp week. You got a lot going on.
Oh, man, I love
appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me.
Awesome. Nick, tell them where to find us.
You can find us at Hammer and Quill Publications on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. And if you live in the Garland area, check out Rodgers Baptist Church if you're looking for a church home. And, of course, if you're anywhere near the Lake Worth area, we're always there. Check us out on YouTube. You can find all of our sermons and worship services and everything else that we got going on at our church. You can find them there.
Got a bunch of stuff going on. Come check us out. But we'll catch you next week for another installment of Thinking Well. In the meantime, stay safe, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.